Where are you at in your quest to be a disciple who makes disciples? Let me share a bit of the path I've walked in this and some of my current thinking, and maybe you can identify where you're at in this journey. It really began for me back in the late 90s when I was faced with the question of what is a disciple? What are the traits of a disciple? And perhaps you know the story of a Sun Life seminar I was at in Kananaskis where they challenged us to define a disciple, DDP, description of a discipled person. And I took that challenge very seriously and did a major study of the New Testament and landed on what I call the DNA of a Christ follower that I started writing about and teaching about, did the book DNA of a Christ follower. But the 8 traits that I landed on are that a follower of Jesus Christ is a lover of God, a lover of people, holy, truth-based, evangelistic, God-dependent, persevering, and focused on eternity. And that really, for me, has been a seminal study. It's been a major part of my development as a disciple, understanding that I am to be these things, that these traits are to be inherent in who I am, and they then ripple out into what I do. But then I began to wrestle with the question of how do we actually make these disciples? And really, without being overly negative or critical, I realized that the way I was pastoring, the way I was doing church, the way we do church, the regular model of church wasn't terribly effective in this. It happened. I mean, I grew up in that context. It does happen, but it seems to be a meandering, almost by chance, by the grace of God, that disciples are made in that context. And so we began wrestling through, my wife and I, what it looks like, how we make disciples. And that's where 12 Church showed up. And the 12 Church ministry was born. And it's a very simple model of church. If you even want to call it church, we call it church. It really comes down to a group that meets and does discovery Bible studies. And I've discovered in disciple-making movements that discovery Bible studies are inherently disciple-making because you're applying the raw word to your life and moving to obedience. We have, of course, evangelism training that flows out into personal evangelism action, intercession as a group and as individuals, and of course the community of the group itself. And in the recent little survey I did, where I asked people what their greatest bottleneck was in their disciple making, the whole issue of isolation came up as the number one issue. And so it's very important that you're not doing this alone, that you're doing it with others. And so I believe that this little process or context is a disciple making environment. And as I've been wrestling through, where we go from here, I've asked the question, what needs to happen on the personal level? We've got the traits, the DNA traits, we've got the context, but what needs to happen personally? What are the stages that I need to go through, that an individual needs to go through to be a disciple on mission? And that is where the missional living map kicks in, where we talk about being gospel saturated and Christ centered and self-feeding, partnering with others, being equipped and released for ministry, winning the lost, developing other believers, and then multiplying ourselves and our groups. And that's the flow, if you want to call it a journey or a pathway, that an individual needs to walk through. And so we're working that through and developing that out. And so I've been asking, okay, is there anything else needed? With all these ideas in place and with this context in place, what else is needed? And there really isn't a lot else needed. In my mind, what else is needed is time. It takes time to be a disciple. It takes time to make a disciple. It requires persistence, perseverance, because it is messy. It is slow. It requires that we take some risks, that we take some initiatives in our personal evangelism, and then also calling others to follow us as we follow Christ, to join us on that mission. And it really comes down to applying what we already know. If we have clear in our head what a disciple is, if we're in a disciple-making context, community like 12 Church, if we understand, the flow that people need to walk through, something like this mission living map, it really comes down to applying what we know and stepping out. And for those who are in such a group, and I would speak to our 12 Church people as well, really the next step is application, is reaching out to others, discipling others, leading a group, an on-mission group, and starting to apply and flex your wings under the direction of the Spirit in this disciple-making journey. Because we know that it's not just about teaching, it's not just about information, it's about training and ultimately application and action. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm at the stage right now. I always am growing in the Word and learning. God's teaching me new things about myself, about Him, about the world. But I know the bottleneck for me and for most of the people I work with is not knowledge. It comes down to time and persistence, taking some risks, taking some initiative, and applying what we already know. So that's some of my current thinking. A bit of a snapshot of where I'm at, where I see our 12 church ministry at. Where are you at? What's the next step for you in being a disciple who makes disciples? What's the next step of obedience? Ask the question and then respond in courageous obedience. God bless. Press on.